friends, welcome back to Beautifully Bookish Bethany, where I have new videos every week about books and the geeky mom lifestyle. Subscribe for more bookish videos and hit that notification bell if you want to be notified every time I release a new video. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you the best books that I read in the second quarter of 2020. This is something new that I'm doing this year. Every quarter I'm looking back and giving you my top reads of all of the books that I read in that quarter, so in that 3 months. I will link up above my first quarter top 5. This was for January, February, and March. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you my 6 favorite books for April, May, and June. Why 6? Because I could not decide which one to cut off. I narrowed it down to 6 and I just couldn't go any farther. So you're going to be getting 6 book recommendations in this favorites video of all of the books that I read in the second quarter of the year. These were my favorites. Part of why I'm doing this is to help out when I get to the end of year and start making some of my favorites lists. I thought it would be interesting to be able to look back on what were my favorites at the end of each quarter. And part of this is because I do read so many books. In quarter 1 of 2020, I read a total of 96 books. In quarter 2 of 2020, I read a total of 75 books. So out of the 75 books that I read in April, May, and June, I am giving you my top 6. With that said, let's go ahead and dive right into them. So the first book to make this list is Sunlen Essence by Josiah Bancroft. This is an adult speculative kind of fantasy novel and I absolutely loved it. I recently actually picked up the sequel to this because I do want to continue on with the series, but this is just one of the most interesting, fresh, and imaginative books that I've read in a while. There are 3 books out in the series so far, and I think book 4 is going to be the final book, and that's coming out relatively soon. This has some very low-key steampunk vibes to it, and it has a lot of rereadability, at least for me. Like, this is something I could see myself definitely wanting to go back and reread just to experience again. The main character is this kind of nerdy, introverted headmaster of a school who has recently married, and his young bride is very kind of spunky and outgoing, and for their honeymoon they are taking a trip to the Tower of Babel, which is a place he's always dreamed of visiting but has never been to before. The Tower of Babel is this very, very tall tower. Nobody knows for sure how large it is, and each floor of this very large tower is called a ringdom because it's a circular tower, and so instead of kingdom, it's a ringdom, and each ringdom has its own laws and rules and is run by different political organizations. So he and his young new bride get there, and on the very first day they are separated and she disappears, and so he has to kind of dig deep, figure out who he really is, and make his way up the tower through a lot of trials and tribulations, trying to find where his wife went and save her. And it's so interesting. There's a lot of twists and turns. There's just a lot here. I would definitely recommend this one. It for sure is a new favorite for me, and I'm so glad that I read this year. My next favorite for quarter 2 is one that has not actually come out yet. This releases in August, and you better bet I have it pre-ordered. It is Lobizona by Romina Garber. I read this as an e-arc from NetGalley, and it was just so good. If you want a good werewolf story, this has Latinx werewolves, it has witches, it's got some portal fantasy to it, and it addresses a lot of big issues, including immigration and immigration policy and illegal immigrants, as well as misogyny and homophobia in some elements of Latinx culture. It's just so good. I loved the world that it created. It was so much fun, and the story was juicy. It had unexpected twists. It didn't always go the direction that I expected it to, but then it also had these bigger, deeper issues that I thought were handled in really, really great ways. So highly recommend Lobizona. Pick it up when it comes out in August. I loved this one, and it's another one that I definitely would reread. And I think this year, that's one thing that I've been trying to think more about is like, is this a book that I would read again? Even if I wouldn't read it again immediately, sometimes I would want to read it again immediately if I had the time for it, but like a year out or 2 years out, like, is this something that I could see myself picking up again and rereading? Lobizona is one that I for sure could. Next up is another book that is coming out in August that I really hope you guys will all go pick up. This is a very, very impressive YA fantasy debut. It is Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. I've got to say, YA fantasy is killing it this year. I feel like I've had so many more awesome YA fantasy books this year than last year. I don't know like what that is, but Raybearer is really great. It's an African-inspired fantasy story that just, like, I don't want to talk too much about it because I feel like the experience is such a part of what makes it amazing, but the world building is incredible. It's really impressive, especially for a debut novel. The characters are all really great. They're complicated, they're fully fleshed out, and there are a lot of like twists and turns and political intrigue and angst that happens in this book, but things don't go the direction that you think. I read a lot of books and I've read a lot of YA fantasy, and so often I can kind of guess like the direction a plot is going to take and like, okay, this is probably what's going to happen. This definitely surprised me. There were things that I was expecting that did not happen the way that I thought they were going to. It's also got just a lot of really great representation with Black characters where it's celebrating their culture and their beauty. There is an asexual character in this book. There's yeah, there's just a lot. There's a lot of secrets, a lot of political intrigue, a lot of big reveals, and I'm definitely excited to read book 2 in the series as well. I for sure will be picking that up. So if you haven't pre-ordered this one yet, go pre-order it along with Lobizona. They're both super fantastic. The next book on this list, I'm sure nobody is surprised because I keep mentioning it in lots of videos lately. That is Chosen Ones by Veronica Roth. Yes. This was one that I keep saying was such a surprise for me because I didn't know anything about it going into the book, and I loved it. And a lot of other people seem not to, at least based on the reviews I read when I first had finished writing my review, but I was a huge fan of this. It's kind of a subversive take on the superhero trope. It's definitely grittier. Our main character is a very prickly woman, and I know a lot of people have this thing of not liking unlikable female characters. I often do really like them. I was definitely vibing with her. I enjoyed it, and I like the project of what this book is doing, and I also really loved the execution of it. So if you haven't heard me talk about it yet, the basic premise of this book is it follows this woman who as a teenager had been one of 5 teens pulled by the US government for training because they thought that they might be these prophesied chosen ones to defeat the Dark One, the big villain. And so as teenagers, they were trained, they went up against the Dark One, they defeated him, and now we're following them 10 years later, specifically the woman who's the main character, but 10 years later, dealing with the trauma of what they went through during that battle. And so she now has anxiety and PTSD and insomnia and trouble with relationships, and many of her fellow cohort of people are also struggling for various reasons. And it's really interesting, like, what do you do after that? And how do you cope with being a public figure, being in the public eye after something like that? And then a big twist happens. And I don't want to talk too much about what happens, but it kind of asks this question of, okay, you are now no longer this sort of naive, hopeful young person, but if you're faced with a similar situation, are you going to handle it the same way, or are you going to tackle things differently? With the twist, some people seem not to like it. I really, really loved everything about that. I loved the way the world was built. I just like this one a whole lot, so give it a try. I thought it was really great. Okay, 2 more books to talk about, and I don't have physical copies of either of them. One of them, I need to this weekend go to my local indie bookstore and buy myself a copy because it just came out, and the other one is in the mail on its way to me because after reading it, I had to buy a copy. So with that said, my next favorite for this quarter is Goddess in the Machine by Lora Beth Johnson. This is seriously one of the best YA sci-fi books I have ever read. It's just so freaking good, and it's a debut, which like it kind of blew my mind. If you like twists and turns, and seriously unexpected twists and turns, and lots of them, you might really like this book. There were a couple of reveals that I guessed before we found them out, but there were quite also like a few things, like big things that I was like, wait, what? I wasn't expecting that. And the twists, like there's a major twist like 40-50% of the way through the book, and then they just keep coming. And it's so smart. The world building is so good. The premise is so good. The execution is just top notch. This is what I want my YA sci-fi to be. So the basic premise here is it follows a teen girl who is put into cryogenic sleep, supposed to be for 100 or 200 years, while she travels through space with the rest of her family to go colonize this distant planet. except that when she wakes up, it's 1,000 years later. She's coping with the fact that everyone she knew and the world that she knew is dead and gone, and everybody thinks she's a goddess. It's so interesting. She has to cope with this new brutal world, things not being what she expected, court intrigue and dark secrets, and this really interesting world where things technologically had advanced so much and then broken down to the point where people now kind of equate technology with religion. They've turned it into almost this magical religious system because they don't really understand how it works anymore. And so that's really interesting, and that's part of why she's viewed as a goddess. And I thought the way it explores those questions is really interesting. It also does this cool thing where she created a dialect of English and kind of imagined, okay, like after 1,000 years, how might English usage change? And it's not that hard to figure out or pick up. You get used to it pretty easily, but there are some like consistent changes that the people living 1,000 years later have made in the way that they use like verbs, for example. And I thought that was just really cool and interesting. And the other perspective character that we get is this quite cocky bastard prince who's been exiled from the main city in this area, and he's funny. Like, he's very full of himself, but in like an entertaining way, and like just like some of his dialogue and internal dialogue like kind of made me laugh. So I would highly recommend you guys check this one out. It is available now. I thought it was fantastic, and I'm super excited to continue on with the series. I can't wait to see where it goes next. And the final book to make my top 6 favorite books of quarter 2 is Grip by Kennedy Ryan. This is a realistic contemporary romance, and man, this one, it hit hard. I loved it so much. I was like, yes, I need this. I need the sequel, and they are on their way to me in the mail. But people have been telling me forever I should read Kennedy Ryan, and I've been meaning to read Kennedy Ryan, partly because she was one of the first Black women to ever win a Rita Award, which was like the big award among the romance community, and this was just like in 2018, I believe, although now they've scrapped that and they're doing new awards because there were like racist issues with the way that was happening. Because the RWA has had problems, for those of you in Romancelandia. But that said, I finally went ahead and read some stuff, and I listened to the audiobook of this. I listened to Flow, which was the prequel novella, and then Grip. I loved Flow too, I gave that one 5 stars, but Grip, it's like a new all-time favorite for me. It does a lot of things really well, but one of the things that I think stands out about it is it's one of the best portrayals that I've seen of an interracial relationship between a Black and white couple in terms of getting at some of the like bigger issues that can come up in the process. And she handles things so well and gives space for both sides of really like grappling with things that don't have easy answers. And on top of that, it's just this like romance where I'm rooting for the couple. I love the characters. There's a horrible villain who I hate so much and is really, really awful. There's a lot of like twists and turns and drama and like juicy family secrets and different things that happen. Like, this would make such a good TV show. Someone should make this into a TV show. It would be like, it would do very well as a TV show. But the story follows Grip and Bristol. Bristol is a white woman from an elite family on the East Coast, and 8 years before the events of Grip in the prequel novella Flow, she goes to California and meets Grip, who's a friend of her brother's, and there's family drama there that I won't talk about here. But Grip is a Black man who grew up in Compton, which is a pretty intense, like, often lower income part of Los Angeles. And when they initially meet is in this specialized art school, trying to get his foot in the door with his music. He is a talented writer and poet and rapper. So they had met and kind of fallen for each other 8 years earlier, but for reasons were not together. And so Grip is set 8 years in the future, where Bristol is now a music manager managing Grip and her brother and some other artists. Grip has become this very successful rapper, and the two of them finally start to deal with some of their issues. Some of what I think is really interesting here is it gets into some of the concerns and assumptions that can sometimes come up with this kind of interracial relationship. Parents get involved in this. Bristol's mom really wants her to be with this wealthy white man. Grip's mom really wants him to be with a black woman who can understand where he comes from and the struggles that he faces. And a lot of the women around Grip express concern and even anger that he chooses Bristol over a black woman, saying, oh, you're just like all of these other black men who get successful and become sellouts and need a white woman on their arm to feel like you've kind of made the American dream. And what I think is really powerful about this book is it really grapples with those questions and with the anger and reasons behind that. So even though Grip and Bristol's relationship isn't about that, and it began before he was ever successful, and there are other reasons for their connection, it grapples with like the reality of those issues coming up. And I don't think I've ever seen a book talk about it, but like it's a very real issue. It also deals with complicated relationships with policing among the black community. And Grip is in this really interesting position where he has a cousin who became a police officer. He has another person close to him who was shot and killed by a police officer. And in the book we get this really intense scene where he's in the car with Bristol and they get pulled over by a cop, and the cop very much like mishandles that situation and it's very tense. And Bristol, like, at the beginning doesn't get it. She's like, why are you so tense and freaked out about this? And while I think that now more people have a understanding with everything that's been going on of why that would be a concern, at the time when this was published, that often was less true. And so it dives into a lot of like really big issues, but also in the context of this like dramatic, compelling romance. So that's a lot of information, but I loved it a whole lot, and this is why it's making my favorites of the year. So there you go. Those are my 6 favorite books that I read in the second quarter of 2020. Talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts or feelings on any of the books that I talked about, and for your question of the day, let me know what was one of your favorite books that you read in the last 3 months. I would love to hear from you. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.